what happens often during the psychedelic experience, you have someone talking about like a very dark, frightening room or a monster or a cliff they're going to fall over. Those are quite often your body and mind's attempts to keep you away from something that it thinks that you can't handle because you couldn't at one time before. And this is often what causes fears in us. Something happened a long time ago and our body says, you can't handle that. That was very, very bad before, so I want you to stay away from that, and I'm going to cause a response or reaction in you when something like that happens so that you don't have to be faced with that again. That becomes something that's hard to approach during a psychedelic experience. Like in every clinical trial, they'll tell you if you see something scary, go toward it. Because you go toward it, I can't tell you how many times people said, I walked into the dark room, I was scared to death, and I sat there, and eventually the lights came on.
Greg, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Daniel.
Absolutely, it's total pleasure to talk to you. We were just talking off cameras for a bit, and what you do for a living when it comes to helping people overcome traumas, whether it's mental health or PTSD. There's a lot that you use the more holistic approach with the psychedelics. But before we dive into that, let's say that area or that industry, do you always want it to be like a transformational coach?
No. In fact, if you would have asked me 10 years ago, I owned a small business. And if you would have asked me 10 years ago, like, what would you do if you could do anything? I didn't have a clue. I mean, if you would have said, hey, you can retire tomorrow and do anything you want to do, or you can be in any profession, I really had no idea. And 10 years ago, I was a very angry and confused person, and I would have no business counseling anyone on anything. And the reason that I'm here doing this now is because this kind of work, coaching, the integration work, the intentional use of psychedelics, were really things that helped me tremendously in a very difficult time in my life. And that just sort of led me here to a place where I can try to help other people in the same way that I was helped. And I guess I should probably explain what I do. Um, as a psychedelic integration coach, I work with people before and or after a psychedelic experience. The middle part, because of legality, is obviously something they do themselves or like in a ceremony or with a facilitator. But I help people prepare beforehand because there are a lot of things you can do to make it more productive. A lot of people do this for healing purposes. I personally have no problem with people using psychedelics for so-called recreational purposes, but a lot of people come to this because they want to make a change in their lives. They have some condition that they've been battling with, something in their lives that's very difficult for them. So I help them prepare beforehand, and afterwards we take their theme or lesson, and there's always a lesson in the psychedelic experience if you know where to look, and help them incorporate whatever changes they'd like to make in their lives through a coaching process. And I started off as a psychedelic integration coach, and probably about half of my clients right now are psychedelic integration. And I do a fair amount of coaching with people just on regular, like life coaching issues as well.
Hmm. That's interesting because you mentioned and something very, I think, key and important that 10 years ago, you didn't know what to do with your life. You were sort of lost. And I feel that a lot of people, especially men, feel uh, in the same place. It's just, well, we feel that we don't have a particular path. And it's like almost like a self imposed pressure, but also what society dictates that what men should be doing and all of this. What, how do you I guess my question would be from that moment that you said, I don't know what to do with my life to let me try it and see if the psychedelic works. How was the process of you taking that step and said, well, let me give this a shot and see if this is what is going to help me move forward?
Well, I guess I'll explain that story. So 10 years ago, I had something happen in my life which turned my life upside down. It was very upsetting. And during that, I realized that I had a lot of childhood trauma that had never been addressed in any way, shape, or form. Because one of the reasons I had childhood trauma, because in my family, we didn't talk about things. So the rug that you sweep everything under had a big giant lump in the middle. And that was manifested in the form of me having a lot of anxiety and not knowing what was happening. So I sought the help of a therapist and a coach. And at the time, I smoked cigarettes, and I told my coach that I was trying to quit smoking. And he said, well, first I should explain that in my late teens and late 20s, I used psychedelics along with just about anything else I could put into my body to alter my consciousness. for the purposes of not having to feel what was going on inside. I didn't know that at the time, but in my late 20s, I became a drug addict and I kind of spiraled out of control. So I pulled myself out. I got out of drug addiction. I stopped using all substances except for cannabis, which I abused for quite a few years. Then, when this thing happened 10 years ago, I told my coach I'm trying to quit smoking. He said, "Well, I read this study that says psilocybin helps with that." So I thought, well, I know about mushrooms, and I got some mushrooms and I took them, and I didn't quit smoking that night, but I did see a lot about why I was in the place I was in my life. What to do with that going forward, I wasn't sure, but I thought now that I've seen this, everything will be different because now I know where the traumas came from and I can see what's happening in my life. And in about 2 or 3 weeks, everything was the same again. And I thought, well, why didn't things change? I've seen what the problem is. It should just change. And I tried it a couple more times, and the same thing happened. A lot of epiphanies and insights about my life and what I could do moving forward, and nothing would change afterward. So I started looking, and I found that there was this thing called psychedelic integration, which I had never heard of. And I found a place that had a psychedelic integration circle here in Los Angeles. It's a safe space where people go to talk about their experiences, ask questions, find community, and get support from other people. And I asked people about integration. And, if you ask 10 people about psychedelic integration, you may get 11 different answers. So it was very confusing as to what you're supposed to do. But nothing I heard from people really resonated with me, and it didn't work when I tried it. A lot of it was people doing the same things that they had done before the journey, and expecting that somehow that if they journaled or did yoga or walked barefoot in the grass, things would change. But the fact of the matter is, you hear a lot about neuroplasticity and building new neural pathways in your brain. So, for instance, I'm right-handed. Now, if I want to have a new neural pathway, I have to do something differently, or the same neural pathway is going to fire when I write. Writing, right hand, it's fired tens, hundreds, millions of times in my life. So it's a very strong neural pathway. If I put the pen in my left hand, the first thing I notice is it's not comfortable. First of all, I don't even know if I'm holding it right. I mean, this I do by reflex, but when I do this, I'm like, well, wait, does my finger go here? And where do I put my thumb? It feels awkward. And if I start writing, it's very uncomfortable. And if I'm writing for the purpose of writing, like jotting something down, my brain is screaming at me, put the pen in your right hand. That's what's going to happen. And this will continue to be uncomfortable until I do it repeatedly. And eventually, I'll hold it normally and my writing will start improving. It's the same way making changes in your life. I didn't understand that in the aftermath of a psychedelic experience, if I wanted to change some pattern, that I needed to change the pattern. I kept waiting to feel like I wanted to do it, like not to be scared to do the thing anymore. And that's generally not what happens. You generally have some way of forging a new neural pathway. And when I figured that out and I figured out how to do it, my life started improving. And eventually people asked, I went to these integration circles and they said, "You're here all the time. Why don't you fill in while I'm gone and you can lead the integration circle?" So now I'm facilitating the circle and people are asking me questions and coming up afterwards and asking for advice on things. And that kept building. And after a while, it only made sense that I got certified as a psychedelic integration coach, like be official. And I kind of did it on the side. I had a small business that I ran. And that business kept coming. And I was sort of telling the universe, I'm working on my job. I don't have time for this. And, a critical mass built up. And at some point it was like, well, that could be what I do, helping people, not this other thing that I do. So started doing it part-time, and now it is my full-time job being a coach. But the question is, what do people do afterwards? Sometimes what they have to do is forge a new habit. And there are all kinds of statistics around. But you'll hear things like it takes 400 repetitions of something to create a new synapse, to really cement in that connection of things like left hand and writing. Fires once, fires again, and pretty soon I now have a solid pathway. So if I pick up my pen, maybe now if I keep doing that long enough, I'll be ambidextrous. But sometimes integration, habit changing, making changes in your life is kind of like that. You may have to do something that's a bit awkward at first, may feel a bit forced, maybe even a little bit uncomfortable until you get used to it. Energy wants to go the way that it's always gone. Our brains are still sort of frozen in 15,000 years ago when literally it did us a lot of good to try to save 1 calorie by not doing something differently because winter's coming and there's not much food. Well, that's not how things are now, but our brains still act that way.
That's very That's very interesting. And you said a lot that I could resonate with and I can relate to. You, I thought honestly that, and you clarify a lot of these questions I had was say, well, I went through the experience, I got some insights, I understood where my traumas were coming from. In my mind was okay. Once you have that information, is well, that means that you're gonna be, now that you understand yourself better, then technically speaking, you're doing better. But it's not how it works. Apparently, you just have to work through all these things. So then I had this question is okay, let's say that you are all of these insights come, I would assume, from your subconscious, right?
You could
Most
say your
likely
unconscious mind.
subconscious mind. So what is the difference? Let's say that somebody has like a high level of self-awareness and that somebody understands where a lot of these traumas are coming from. Would this person get a different set of insights or information going through this specific let's say experience? Would this person get something different from the trip?
Different than someone who didn't have as much self awareness? Is that the question?
No, let's say that hypothetically me, I have a lot of high self-awareness. I understand where a lot of my traumas, a lot of my fears, my social anxiety comes from, and I understand where all that comes from. I still haven't been able to, let's say, take action and do something to change or to regulate and to heal my nervous system. Having those insights, if I take one of these trips or if I have one of these psychedelic experience, will I guess it's very hard to answer, but will I get different insights or it would be the same thing that I already know?
Yeah, that is a question that's not answerable, as you said. But I will say that what happens many times during the psychedelic experiences, sometimes something that you sort of know in the back of your mind really comes to the forefront. You might realize something like, I didn't realize that I wanted that so much, I disliked that so much, that this was as much of an issue, that I missed that so much. These things will really come out during an experience. They'll amplify things for you, if you will. Stan Grof called psychedelics non-specific amplifiers of consciousness. And I should say there's a flip side to this. In many of the clinical trials that are going on, government-sanctioned clinical trials, when you apply, many of them will ask you questions along the lines of, I want you to remember the least favorite psychological state you've been in the last few months and ask yourself if you'd be willing to have that amplified 5 to 10 times, because that's a distinct possibility. And if the answer is no, then this may not be something for you. Now, preparation before an experience can do a lot to mitigate that kind of thing. An unpleasant experience or a bad trip, as people might call it. Sometimes that comes from not understanding what's happening, and we can talk about exactly what that is and how that's done. But preparation can help a lot that. But there's a possibility that one of the things that might happen during an experience, and it might sound strange, but it seems that there's a sort of intelligence to these molecules that are inside psychedelic substances, and that we ingest them and they sort of scan us and see you have a lot of X emotion inside of you, and that needs to come out. You know, we can only hold in our emotions for so long before it becomes like a closet that's full of junk where you have to hold the handle. And if you let it go, things are going to come flying up. When people come for coaching, it's not uncommon for them to say something like, I don't know what's wrong, but I don't feel good and I don't like this. Well, emotions are like everything else in this universe. They have a life cycle. They are born, they perform a certain function, and then let's say they're transformed because nothing dies, or, the law of thermodynamics says energy is only transformed, it can't be created or destroyed. But emotions have to go through that cycle, they have to be felt. And what happens is people can stop emotions halfway. I start feeling them, that doesn't feel good, I don't want to feel that. And when that happens, it goes into my body. It doesn't go away. It hasn't been felt yet, and I own it. It's going to be begging me to be felt. So when I said I was a very angry person 10 years ago, I had a lot of anger in me that wanted to come out. The only way out is through. So when a psychedelic substance scans you and says you have a lot of guilt inside you, it may make you feel guilt really badly for a period of time that can be very, very uncomfortable. But it's not just feeling guilty in an empty way like we do normally. It's letting that stuff out of us. Like, I think it was also Stan Groff who said the full expression of any emotion is that emotion's death knell. Now, nobody has suppressed happiness inside of them trying to get out, because when we feel something good, we want all of it and we feel as much as possible. But when we feel something bad, we try not to feel it. And that's when things get stuck in us, and that's when the emotions want to be felt. So, what may happen during a psychedelic experience is you may feel those things for a while. And believe me, feeling bad like that feels really good later. It's a good feeling to have that stuff come out of you. Most people cry during a psychedelic experience, at least the first few times. A lot of people will cry because we all have tears built up inside of us that want to get out. You may have particular insights that may be amplified. Maybe you know already, maybe you get a new angle on it, or maybe it's something completely new. But what happens afterwards is your brain has three primary functions: to learn, to remember, and to automate things. Automating things is great. You put on the seatbelt every time you get in the car and you don't even know you're doing it. It's just you're in and your arm reaches over without you even thinking about it, puts on the seatbelt. That's automation. Generalization. Once you open a door a few times, then you know what a door is like. You don't have to. When I got on this call, I didn't have to figure out how to work a computer because I used a computer before. I've done video calls, so I know how to do it. That's automation. However, our brains automate psychological processes too. I'm a small person, something happens, I have a bad feeling in my body. Now, those two things are fused together in my nervous system. Every time that thing happens, I have a bad feeling in my body. And we should be specific and say there's no such thing as an emotion that your brain can feel. Your brain doesn't even have physical sensations. They can poke probes into your brain and you can't tell anything's happening. It can't feel emotions. Okay? Emotions are felt in the body. They're either a sensation or some constellation of sensations, and your brain tells you what that means. Right? So that happens, I have a bad feeling in my body. The next thing my nervous system does is starts generalizing. It says, this thing is a lot like that. So it sees this reaction as a protection. That's what it thinks. There's a danger. I need you to be kind of scared of it. That thing's kind of like that. Maybe it's a look on someone's face. It's not the same look of the same person. That's kind of like it. Saw the same reaction. And now I see that thing's kind of like this. And before you know it, there's a whole lot of things that cause a reaction in me. That's automated in my brain. So my unconscious mind reacts a half second ahead of my conscious mind. That's why when you're triggered, something happens, you don't have a good feeling, and before you know it, you're saying, wow, I don't like the way I'm acting. I don't like this reaction. I don't know why I just said that. That's because it happens before you know it consciously. This is the challenge we have when we have these insights and epiphanies and realizations of what's going wrong with us. We still have automated programs running in our brain connected to our bodies that cause a response in us, whether we know it and like it or not. Now, there are things that you can do. There are processes, and I practice NLP and HNLP, and a lot of our work is directed at that, to go into the nervous system outside of conscious awareness and unhook those kind of things so we don't have the same response anymore. But this is the challenge for many people. I see the thing that I'm doing, I don't like it, I have determined that I want to make a change, but somehow I still have this reaction over and over.
See, that right there is very. I could completely understand what you were saying because that's what I experience on mostly daily basis. I feel, just this rush of anxiety. I've always been an anxious person, and then I feel it, and every now and then I feel like, okay, there's no a reason why I should feel anxious. It comes like almost like a second nature. It's just like supernatural, anything. But another thing, when it comes to the emotions, a couple of years ago my life turned, upside down. My marriage fell apart and all of that, and I've been sort of grieving ever since. But it seems like that feeling is still there. And this is something I was asking. I've done a few sessions of breath work, and breath work, you have a similar experience when it comes to crying, like in this thing, and it comes out of nowhere. When the first time I did it, I didn't know what to expect, and towards the tail end of the thing, I just felt this rush of emotions, and then obviously I had to cry. But I was talking to the person who was leading this, and I say, "Hey, is there any moment when you stop grieving?" Because here's the thing: I don't know if you know who Alain de Botton is. He's a sort of a philosopher, a writer, a British guy. He has a YouTube channel called School of Life. So he said something along the lines like, many times you're not suffering because you deserve to suffer, but because you're way too familiar with the feeling of suffering. So at that point is in when it comes to my case, and that's why I sort of wanted to talk to somebody in the psychedelic world. It's like, am I suffering because it's far too familiar, because it's like a it feels home, or still some emotions there that are repressed, and I haven't been able to feel them fully, and maybe the psychedelic experience will help me just, I wouldn't say get rid of it, but just let it pass through. Because as you said, the only way out is through. So, and that is where I'm at that point where it's like, okay, I don't know exactly which one is the one happening. Either is feels like home, or I still need to deal with some of these emotions.
Well, I mean, there's no one who could know that because both, either or both are possible. You know, it's not unusual to have comfort in a particular feeling. You know, a lot of people, your nervous system can get addicted to a state of anxiety. You know, it's something that's familiar. There's a very strange thing that happens with humans, and that is that sometimes we will want something that's unpleasant, or we may imagine some future event that's not what we want to happen, just because we want some sort of certainty that feels better than not knowing, or not knowing what to expect, if that makes sense. I know personally, for me, one of the best feelings that my body can have is when I feel wronged by someone, and I have that feeling like, how dare that person do whatever the thing is? And I can get really lost in that. And in the moment, it feels great. Now, when I get out of it, I think, oh my God, what was that? But it really feels like a place I want to stay and just really explore what I'm doing. I can get lost for an hour or two and then realize I've really been rolling around in the mud with this thing. So I know the sensation of, I know the idea of having a sensation that you really don't want to have, that in the moment feels very familiar and like a place you can go back to.
Yeah, that is
It's quite
which.
possible that that would come up during a psychedelic experience, or something else that is affecting that. And this is something that quite often happens with psychedelics. People will say, I want to explore this issue. And I'll usually tell them to just go with whatever comes up during the experience, because if you're in the experience, you realize, I'm kind of thinking differently. I'm going to really focus on this thing in my life. Well, that might be okay, but sometimes what comes to you is something completely out of left field that you didn't expect at all. Like, we think that we need to cut a limb off of the tree, and it turns out we're watering it incorrectly. That kind of thing happens on psychedelics all the time. So you never know what's going to come up that's going to directly impact the issue that you have.
Hmm. No, it makes sense because I guess you consciously rational want to deal with something, but your subconscious is in a total different space, or any kind of past experiences or traumas that you have experienced is the one that need to be addressed. But since we're on that topic, right, and you mentioned the nervous system, how do we how do we heal the nervous system? One, because I feel that I've been trying to rationalize, to logically fix that part of me, which is impossible. And number two is, let's say with anxiety, social anxiety, trauma, or anything like this that can hold people back, fears, irrational fears based on old stories that we told ourselves. Rationally, we understand that it makes no sense whatsoever, but our subconscious hasn't caught up to that story. How do we bring the subconscious and our conscious self in the same to the same page?
Well, I don't know about the same page. There is some question about, when you talk about subconscious, we're also talking about unconscious. So if you think of it this way, so the conscious mind, when you think about your conscious mind, is really what we have in our attention. That was determined by, I think, George Miller in the 50s to be seven plus or minus two chunks of information. So I can be aware that I'm talking to Daniel, that I have something else that's coming up at 2:30, that I had lunch not long ago, and I have something in the refrigerator for dinner, and I need to take my car in for servicing. And when I get to nine of those things, I'm kind of maxed out. And I might be down like around five during points of the day when I don't have a lot of room. Your unconscious mind is simply everything else that's not in your conscious awareness. That's all it is. It's every thought, memory, dream, emotion, incident, idea, everything that's happened to us in the past is in that same room. But you can think of your conscious mind as like a little flashlight in a big dark room. It is just shining its light on seven, like 5 to 9 chunks of information. But everything else is already there and we already know it. And the problem is that when we process things, so let's take, for instance, hypnosis. Like, that people can be witness to a bank robbery and say, I don't know, it seemed like the guy was about 6 foot tall and I think he's wearing sneakers. You put that person under hypnosis and suddenly they say he was about 6'1", he was wearing a brown jacket, he had some sneakers that had like a little cartoon on them, he got into a green car. All of that was there before, but their conscious mind doesn't see it. It's unconscious. It's the same thing for a lot of things that are going on within us. So we have a lot of information that has been deleted, distorted, or generalized when it entered our mind. And it sort of formed this map of what's happening in the world. We have impoverished maps. And someone who's suffering generally has some information missing that would be valuable to them. And that information often relates to the relationship that they have, to the reaction they have, that has to do with the memory that they have. So memories and reactions can stay pretty consistent, but your relationship to those can change significantly. Memories can and do change. There's such a thing as memory reconsolidation, where memories change over time depending on new information we have. Your reaction to those adjusts accordingly, but your relationship to that reaction is the thing that often changes when you get new information. That information often has to do with who is at fault or what happened or why something happened.
Okay, so let me see if I get this right. So you're saying it's like, because that we only know, or we are consciously aware of maybe 10%, maybe 5%, maybe less of all our knowledge and information we have in our brain.
Very tiny, probably like a fraction of a fraction of a percent, because
Okay,
everything's in there.
everything is in there. Okay, so that is between the conscious and unconscious self. In this thing, then what is exactly the subconscious? Is the subconscious the nervous system, or is there something else?
Well, you can call your unconscious mind your nervous system and or your body. Because when we're working with people in trance or in certain places, their body often answers before their brain does. So this is where you think about the reaction in your body, that's unconscious. Your
Okay.
body reacts a half a second before your conscious mind does. And you can think of that also as your nervous system.
And how do we heal that? Because I can give you a personal example that I've been struggled for a while now. I'm a sort of an introverted guy, but then once I know a person, I can have regular conversation, right? Or if it's a specific topic, I can order food. I can just be at a grocery store. I can talk to you, over video call on this podcast. But let's say I'm out there in the wild, and then I'm about to approach like a new group of people, just trying to make some small talk, some sort of level of connection. In my mind, I know that there's nothing to be afraid of. It's just like a normal human interaction. The moment I get close to the thing, my nervous system just, goes off, anxiety goes through the roof, and the fear just paralyzes me. And in my mind, I'm trying to rationalize, think, okay, this makes no sense. Me feeling this way makes no sense whatsoever. And yet, this fear is so paralyzing that I'm just like, okay, I'm not gonna do anything right now. That is kind of the one of the things that I've been seeing in my life quite a bit, that I'm trying to know how we can heal that part of us, those fears, that it could be as just as simple as mine, or somebody who just went to, I don't know, came back from a deployment, and any sound just triggers memories and emotions.
Mhm.
And so how can those people just find healing, or I guess regulation, in that nervous system?
Well, let's go to the far end of the spectrum when you talked about people in deployments. So when you talk about things like PTSD, when something serious or maybe even life-threatening happens, well, when something happens, our brains take information and various things happen. And one of the things that happen is the thing that just happened to us, around that we form a sort of a narrative. So that regardless of what it is, I can talk to you about it and not be in it. Okay. So this guy said something and it really pissed me off. And at the time I felt awful. But once I have some distance from it, I can tell you, hey, Daniel, this guy said something. I got so pissed off about it. And I don't feel it. Now, with PTSD, that thing bypasses the narrative process and it goes to a part of the brain where the only way to access that memory is to relive it. There are no words, there's no separation. I have to be in the experience. So now, when you ask someone with PTSD what happened, they start talking about it, they are physically back there. It's just like they're at the place where the bad thing was happening. This is where psychedelics like MDMA can be very helpful. Treatment resistant PTSD is being used in studies by MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, to treat treatment resistant PTSD in veterans and first responders. And what happens with MDMA is it quiets down the amygdala, and people are able to see, possibly for the first time, that that thing was over here, and I'm over here, and I'm safe now. And they're having a tremendous success rate. And probably in the next couple of years, MDMA treatment will be a prescribable treatment through a medical provider, therapist, for people with PTSD. Now, when you come back down the spectrum and you just have people who have like really bad anxiety, well, there are some things you can look at. Exposure is one of those things. You do the thing that you're afraid of over and over. You can't just say that to anybody because some people have really bad anxiety. They'll just make themselves anxious over and over again. There are some physiological things we can do. So you talk about the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is two channels of nerves that run from our gut all the way up to our brain, and it's the thing that counteracts fight or flight. It's the thing that makes us get out of severe anxiety. So there's some simple things you can do that will help downregulate your vagus nerve. One of those is you have this little crook in your ear down here. You can just put a finger in there and very gently pull on that. And if you do that on both ears and you wait about 20 seconds, you'll probably notice a little bit of warmth there. And when I let go after I do this, I can feel a little rush of heat. I also feel kind of a sense of calm and a little relaxation through here. So the vagus nerve is down regulating. There are some physiological things we can do to take the edge off. One more thing for the vagus nerve is, vagus nerve is behind these muscles here. Sometimes it seems like you get anxious and your neck gets stiff. Sometimes your neck gets stiff and impinges on the vagus nerve and it makes you feel anxious. So you can just let your head fall to one side and gently place a hand here and notice that little by little it gives away a little more, a little more. If you hold that 30 seconds on each side, once again, you'll feel the vagus nerve kind of down regulate. There are some habits that we can have. So when we are in these situations, quite often there is something we are saying, hearing, or seeing in our minds that's sort of throwing logs on the fire. The problem is that when you are in a problem is basically a neural network. It's a little gathering of neurons that says, this is how I'm going to react to this situation. And most people have probably noticed that when they're really in a problem, like everything looks shitty, their friends can tell them, well, your life's pretty good and you've got kids and you like your job and your attitude's just like, they're a bunch of jerks. I don't know. I don't really like my life right now because that neural network has a boundary around it and it doesn't have access to all that other information. So you're a little bit helpless when you are in the midst of a problem, which includes having your vagus nerve jacked up. That's part of it. If you can calm yourself down physiologically through breathing, through vagus nerve, through one of the many things that people do to help regulate themselves, that can help take some of the edge off so that you can kind of go into that activity. And if you do it enough times, if it's not too much for you, and I'm not talking about people with serious trauma, I'm talking about people who have anxiety. If you can manage to do the thing that you're scared of repeatedly, it won't be too long before your brain says, I see. I thought this was really dangerous, but apparently nothing's happening now, so this is okay. The number of times you have to do it, it depends on a lot of different factors. But we'll just call that exposure and say that if you can do the thing that you're afraid of doing repeatedly, eventually your brain will have enough evidence to show it that you're not going to be in danger, which is what it's telling you when you're really anxious about a situation. It's dangerous. That's why we have these feelings.
Yeah, that is. I mean, those tips are very helpful, and I'm definitely gonna try a few of them. But yes, it's very frustrating when you rationally know that it makes no sense having those fears, but your body's acting differently. So it's almost like you need to reteach your body or just rewrite that story, but you cannot do it in one sitting just thinking about it. You actually need to show your body, no, look, it's fine. You don't have to freak out. I'm not in danger. So it's a long process. It's frustrating. And yeah, I mean, I guess that is one of the ways of doing it. But you mentioned something for the PTSD, which was the MDMA. And when I was doing some research about the psychedelics, I realized that there are several different ones. It comes from ayahuasca, the mushrooms, LSD, etc., etc. What is the main difference between all of these different psychedelic drugs?
Well, there are subtle differences between all of them, but let's just separate out first, like MDMA. MDMA is not a tryptamine. It's not a psychedelic in the sense that maybe psilocybin mushrooms or LSD or ayahuasca is, or DMT, something of that nature. MDMA is an empathogen, which means it fosters empathy. It's also been called an intactogen, like I can feel things. So people who take MDMA, which if you've heard of ecstasy, ecstasy is not MDMA, but ecstasy has MDMA in it. It probably has other things in a pressed pill form. MDMA is the pure drug that's in ecstasy. And MDMA is something that helps you see things in a way that you hadn't before. It makes it easy to say things that may be difficult to say otherwise, hear things that may be difficult to hear otherwise, and possibly see things in a different way without being very full on psychedelic. It just can help you shift things because it downregulates the amygdala and the fight or flight system, and the things that I'm usually scared of, I'm not as scared of when I'm on MDMA. Now, the other psychedelics are quite different in that they will produce like visionary experiences. You may see things or hear things, mostly with your eyes closed. I mean, very rarely will psychedelics actually produce some sort of hallucination right in front of you with your eyes open. They'll distort things, but usually with eyes closed, you may get a lot of different things happening on psychedelics. The flavor of that journey is different in various ways for different people. But when I say molecule, I'm talking about the thing that it comes down to. There's a similarity in what happens eventually, getting down to emotions and things that have happened to me and helping me reframe things. And that's actually a very important part of what you were talking about before. When you're talking about things like anxiety, most people who have a state like that have some information missing. This is an impoverished map. And working with someone who can see that and helping you work through that sometimes can provide you with that information that you can't access in the problem state, which will help you reframe things in a way that you see them differently and it doesn't affect you the same way. This is why sometimes therapy is effective or coaching is effective or something like that, because someone can help you work through it and see things that it's impossible to see on your own when you're in a problem state.
Okay, so this information can come, as you said, from coaches or therapists, but also on these other psychedelic drugs, not MDMA.
Well,
Now,
MDMA can provide you information and provides it in a different way. But
different.
there's a missing piece in here, and that is when you read about all of the studies that are being done right now with psychedelics, the clinical trials that are being done, and you read about the success rates and what they're doing, it's important to remember that there's a significant therapeutic component in all of those. That people have therapy beforehand and therapy afterwards. Because as it was in my case, you can see a lot of things differently during a psychedelic experience, but what happens after the experience is sometimes that all kind of fades, and you don't end up taking action based on what you saw.
Gotcha.
You can feel
So,
quite different for some time afterwards. There's something called like a pink cloud. It can be a couple of days, a couple of weeks where you feel like everything's different, and then that may eventually start to fade sometimes.
it just fades away. So, based on that, how do people prepare for let's say, for the first psychedelic experience, if they're trying to heal some past traumas, not to the degree of PTSD, but let's say, childhood traumas, anxiety, or depression? What do they have to do in order to get themselves ready before the experience?
Well, having intention is very important. What do I want from this experience? It's a very simple question, and I recommend that you chunk up to the highest level. What is it you want from this? And it doesn't have to be very specific and not nuts and bolts, but what am I, what will that get for me? If you keep asking your question, like, what do I want that for? What will that get for me? You'll keep getting a different answer and kind of move up to the highest level of what you're doing this for. And that's something that you figure out. And then during the journey, you just let it go. Once it's in your mind, it's in there. But you should also be prepared to be very uncomfortable because that's something that happens. It doesn't always happen, but it does happen. I recommend that if it's your first time, you have someone there, whether that's a facilitator, you're in some sort of ceremonial setting, or you have a sitter with you, that's someone just to help you if you get into some trouble and you feel uncomfortable and you want to hold a hand or have someone listen to you. I recommend that. You should know that, as is the case with emotions, nothing that comes up during this experience can physically harm you. That whatever it is that's going to come up, it's something that you've seen before. But when you see things sometimes, and this happens often when we're small, I see something and it's very frightening, and my body steps in and it says, okay, that was really bad. Like you almost died, but you didn't. You really didn't, but that's what your body thinks. Okay. So I caused this response in you, and it was really bad for you. So you probably should not go to that place again. What happens often during the psychedelic experience, you have someone talking about like a very dark, frightening room or a monster or a cliff they're going to fall over. Those are quite often your body and mind's attempts to keep you away from something that it thinks that you can't handle because you couldn't at one time before. And this is often what causes fears in us. Something happened a long time ago, and our body says, you can't handle that. That was very, very bad before, so I want you to stay away from that, and I'm going to cause a response or reaction in you when something like that happens so that you don't have to be faced with that again. That becomes something that's hard to approach during a psychedelic experience. Like in every clinical trial, they'll tell you if you see something scary, go toward it. Because you go toward it, I can't tell you how many times people said I walked into the dark room, I was scared to death, and I sat there, and eventually the lights came on. I went up to the monster, and it turned out to be just a guy. It wasn't really a monster. I fell off the cliff and I died, and I felt much better. I usually tell people if you're in a psychedelic experience, you feel like you're going to fall off a cliff or face something scary or you're going to die or go crazy, to go ahead and do that. Those are things that are like put there to keep you from surrendering fully. So those are a few of the things that you can do during an experience. Have somebody with you. Dipping your toe in the water beforehand is always a good idea. So you talked about breath work. You can do breath work. You can work with cannabis in certain settings, and those things will give you an idea of what it's like. It's not a full-on psychedelic experience, but it's similar to what may happen to you during experience. And then I recommend starting off slow. Don't just take a giant dose because someone told you have to take what's called a heroic dose or whatever. You don't need to. You can start slow, and sometimes low doses may give you a lot of information. And then I always recommend having someone to talk to or work things through with after the experience, whether that's some sort of coach or therapist or whatever it is.
Okay. So one of my main concerns about this whole thing is what are the chances the experience going wrong, and the person ends up, as you said, nothing physical will happen to you, but are there chances of that you end up being worse on an emotional and psychological state?
Well, if you are unprepared for what happens, so this is why they ask the question saying, can you take your worst psychological state in the last few months? Would you mind having that amplified 5 to 10 times? Because that can happen. And if it does, what they recommend is that you just be in that. These substances are largely feeling and emotion generators. Remember, they scan you and they say there's a lot of X in you. So you need to feel X, and they will make you feel X. And I've had clients feel like this incredibly overwhelming guilt over stealing a cookie out of the cookie jar when they were 8. Well, I don't think they needed to feel that guilt, but that was a convenient button for the substance to push so that they would feel the guilt and it would get out of them. You may feel a very uncomfortable emotion, but what happens sometimes is people have that happen. They're not prepared, and they hear something goofy like there's no such thing as a bad trip, and they think that means I'm not going to feel bad. And then they start feeling bad and they say, oh no, something's wrong. I need to stop this. And that won't happen. If you're in that experience and something's coming, It's going to teach you a lesson about life. And that lesson is if something is already happening or about to happen, it doesn't matter if you don't like it or don't want it to happen, it's going to anyway. So, trying to stop yourself from those unpleasant emotions during a psychedelic experience or trying to keep something away is what often happens to people who have an unpleasant experience. Now, an unpleasant experience can also be just what you feel from processing the thing that's inside of you. So, something bad happened a long time ago. I stopped that experience. There are incomplete experiences inside of me. I may have to, in a way, relive that experience and the emotions that were associated with it so that it's complete and it's out of me. And that can be very uncomfortable. Now, some people aren't ready for this. So, one of the first things I tell people is psychedelics are not for everyone. There's a possibility that you might be shaken after this experience, and it might take you a while to work through it. I've seen that in people. There's some very powerful substances out there, and I saw one person I knew personally who spent 14 months trying to unravel the experience he had after a very powerful psychedelic experience. It just shook him to his core. He had to work through that. So it is possible for someone to be less stable after a psychedelic experience if they don't know what they're in for. And that's something people should always consider.
Yeah, I think that's the only thing truly to that is keeping me away from that. I've never done drugs. I rarely drink alcohol anyway. So it feels like you're not going to. The scary part is like you're not in control of what happens on that trip. You're just completely at the mercy of your own body, I guess.
Well, I'm going to say that the lessons we get during a psychedelic experience are never about a psychedelic experience. They are all lessons about life. So if you really back up and look at it, you're almost never in control. Our minds like to think we're in control because we predict what's going to happen. So let's say I'm watching a movie and I'm really identified with some character on the screen, and I say, yeah, pick that thing up, talk to that guy, eat that food, and everything's cool as long as he's doing it. But as soon as I say turn down that street and he turns down that street, I say, what's happening? That's what happens with us in real life because every day, every one of us does things we don't want to do and we don't do things we want to do. So, how much control do we really have? We may have control a majority of the time, but we're never in full control. And psychedelics will show that to us like, you're not in control here. It shows us, when it amplifies emotions, it shows us what's happening on the surface. And sometimes during a psychedelic experience, you'll realize when you're reacting to things, oh my God, this is happening under the surface every day. Like, it doesn't blow up and I don't get completely anxious, but all day long I'm having little triggers and little reactions to things I don't like because things aren't going the way that I want them to because I'm not really in control. But none of those really come out very strongly because I'm used to that and I know that things aren't always going to happen the way I want, but I have this illusion of control. Psychedelic can strip that away from us by showing us you're not in control. And the only thing you can do in this situation is to surrender. And it's trying to show you, look, when these things happen every day, the best thing you can do is say, okay, that's the thing that's happening. Because if you don't like the sun coming up in the east every morning, you may have a very unpleasant life.
Yeah, I mean, what do you resist persist, and I guess
Absolutely. Yeah.
so. I guess in my mind, the control part was the strong emotions. It's like when anger or sadness comes, and is either unpleasant or is is it at a bad time. I'm at work, I'm doing some stuff, so I push it away. I can control that. I can control the way that I push it. I can control the way that I bottle. And if I don't want to feel it, I can sort of somewhat control that. But in the psychedelic experience, I don't know if you can just resist those emotions. I think that at that point your conscious self is not as powerful, I would say, when it
Absolutely.
comes to emotion.
That's the idea. That's why they ask you if you would mind having that state amplified. And yeah, that's what we all do. We have sort of, we have a defined, we put some boundaries around when we do or don't feel things. But I understand what you're saying. You're at work, you don't want to get angry, but what we don't do is we don't go home and feel that anger later. And that's inside of us. And it's one more thing in the closet. And we keep doing that again and again and again. And there are times when, like you say, maybe you're at work, it's not appropriate. There are a lot of times when, first of all, we don't have to be angry. I can't tell you how many times I have a client who says they don't like something, and I say, well, that's going to happen anyway, right? And they say, yeah, but I don't like it. So now we're back to the sun coming up in the east. I mean, if I decide I don't like that, how much does it sense does it make for someone's going to say it's going to come up in the east tomorrow, and I say, yeah, but I don't like it. So sometimes the thought that I don't like something is the only thing that keeps me from surrendering to it. In other words, accepting it. That's the lesson that's trying to be imparted to us during experiences like this. Like, you may not like it, but it's happening inside of you. And it may seem like it's not happening because you can control it, meaning you're not feeling it right now, but it's going to come back later. This is why people come to therapy and coaching, because all of this stuff is in me, and now the closet's full. It's okay when it's here. I can maintain, I can do okay. And it gets here, and it's not too bad here. It's getting uncomfortable here. Now it's really uncomfortable. I can't take it. Now I need somebody to help me. This is all things that I don't like, and I decided not to have the experience at the time. Or they may be things that happened to me that I didn't want. So if something's coming at me and it makes me feel angry, and I say, I don't want to feel that right now, after a while your brain says, oh, I get it. That's what we do with this. Don't worry. You don't have to do that anymore. This is what happens with a seatbelt. Well, first time we drive a car, it seems impossible. There's the steering wheel and the gas and the brake and the mirrors and other cars, and you have to step on the gas when you're doing this and take your foot up. It's like, this seems impossible. And it's jerky. You don't know what you're doing. Well, now you get in the car and you don't think about driving. You can be talking to someone while you're walking to your car, get in, put on the seatbelt, start the car, drive for an hour and get home and realize you've been talking to this person the entire time, and you don't think you were paying attention to driving, and you don't have to, because your unconscious mind has automated that process. It says, look, you go ahead and you talk to people and you create and you do other things. I'll take care of these mundane tasks that we do over and over and over again. So when you do something over and over again, your brain says, I get it. I'll take over from here. Now I have no choice. A feeling comes in that I don't like, get stuck down. After a while, that process almost becomes automated to where a lot of times we don't have conscious control over it sometimes. It's the process that we have automated in ourselves by not wanting to feel certain emotions. It happens again and again and again and again. Your brain says, don't worry, I'll automate that. You're out of the equation for now. And if you're not paying conscious attention at the time, which we are often are not, it just goes into that closet. Now, if you're sitting there conscious, looking at the thing that's upsetting you, feeling what's happening in your body, it's a much different experience. Then you're conscious to the experience, but we usually don't do that.
And how can you reprogram your brain or your body to stop doing that? Because it was a behavior you created, fine, but if you're not consciously aware of, like you said, we're driving, we're not even we think that we're not paying attention. It's already automatic how we get from point A to point B. How do I create consciousness and awareness that I'm pushing emotions down in an automatic form?
Well, one of the best things you can do, and one of the biggest parts of integration for me is, and it sounds cliche and it doesn't mean anything anymore, but that's being mindful. Okay, when you think of mindfulness, everything's meditation and breathing a certain way and body scans and all kinds of complicated things. But Ellen Langer, a Harvard psychology professor who wrote the book called Mindfulness and has written extensive research on mindfulness for over 40 years now, peer-reviewed research and some excellent books. Ellen Langer, the godmother of mindfulness, says that mindfulness is the process of noticing things. That's all it is. If you are noticing things, then you're not on autopilot. When we're on autopilot, if you look into the subject of psychedelics, you'll see a lot about psychedelics downregulating the default mode network. Okay. The default mode network was discovered, I think, in the 80s by some scientists doing studies on the brain and MRIs. And when they told someone to perform a task and do something and see where their brain lights up, at one point they would say, okay, well, take a break right now. And when they did, they started noticing that when they said that, the same region of the brain would light up in people. That became known as a default mode network. That is where the self, that's where Greg resides in me, all the memories and all the things that make me me. It's also where I go when I'm on default. In other words, when I'm on autopilot. When you drive the same way to work every day and you do that 100 times, you are likely in default mode when you're driving or when you're talking to your friend in that 1 hour trip we were just discussing. Now, If you're driving on a dark road at night and you don't know it and it's raining and you have to pay attention, the default mode network is not on. The task positive network is engaged at that time because I'm paying focused attention to something. The default mode network cannot be on at the same time as the task positive network. Those two, one turns on and the other turns off. So, one thing that you can do to be aware of what's happening in your world is just to notice things, to be curious about things. Now, I should say there's a caveat. That is, if what you're curious about is why do I feel this way and when did it start and what's the root cause and how do I stop it, those are default mode network questions. Okay. You can never figure out why you're in a problem while you're in the problem. That information is not available in that neural network that we talked about. But if you're curious about, wow, what is it that's happening right now that's making me feel this way? What is the sensation in my body? Because remember, your brain thinks that it's feeling something, but it doesn't. Your brain doesn't know what's happening. It's guessing what's happening in your body. It's telling you that something's not right. Now, mostly when that happens, the brain has cut off our sensation of the body, and we don't feel that unpleasant sensation. So there's two things you can do. One is to notice the discomfort in your body. I train all my clients to do that. When you don't feel good, I want you to notice that your body is uncomfortable. You don't have to do anything with that at once, but it helps a lot to realize that your body is uncomfortable. Because when you do that, then your brain is not on the lookout for what is the problem out here. It still will be, but not as much. So, noticing that I have some discomfort and taking time whenever I can. And the way that Ellen Langer recommends to do this is take time every day to notice what's new and different. And what's new and different might be something as simple as really looking at the artwork that's on the coffee cup I drink out of every morning. I used this cup for 2 years before I really looked at it. It's a tarot card, but I hadn't examined it fully. There's two ceiling fans in this office. This one has three lights, that one has four. This one's from Hampton Bay, that one's a no name. This one has four blades, that one has five. I didn't know that a few months ago. There's things all around me that I can be noticing every day. And if I'm noticing things, I'm not on autopilot. And when someone is upset, if you feel your body and you notice what's happening, you're going to have a different experience than you will if you're trying to shove it away. Now, I'll just say that sometimes not feeling your body is a protection that we have. So it's not just something you dive into with both feet without thinking about it first. But what you have is like, let's just say, garden variety anxiety or being triggered about something. If I stay in my body and I notice what's happening, I'll have a different experience of that than I would on autopilot.
Got it. So what you're trying to say that this with through mindfulness, or in this case, to look at new things and really pay attention, is mostly trying to stay in the present, because our default settings either live in the future or the past.
Absolutely.
So and that would just help you to, well, I guess you reduce your anxiety by not focusing on the future, and you can somewhat reduce your depression by not focusing on the past.
Yeah. Because
To
anxiety,
some extent,
the thing about it's great to be smart, but smart people can always, forecast something far out in the future that they won't be able to happen, won't be able to handle. That's easy to do. But it's also easy to forget that if something's going to happen in the future, there are some things that are going to happen in between. They're going to make me sort of a different person so that I'll be able to handle that. If I was 10 years old imagining myself in something, doing something that happened when I was 25, I wouldn't have the tools to handle that. But a lot happened in between that time. There's an old Buddhist saying that says, the man sitting in the chair is not the same as the man who walked through the door. Life and things happening change us in a way and they give us tools. When you're imagining things happening in the future, even if it's a few days away, there may be something that happens between then and now that makes that situation different for you. But if I'm sitting here right now, I can find all kinds of things that I might not be able to handle and I can imagine. But there's an old saying that says, worrying works. 99% of the things I worry about don't come true.
yep, that is that is definitely something that happens to me a lot. I have this default setting, as you said, of living in the future, imagine a lot of things, and it could be from 2 days from now to 5 to 10 years from now. We
Yeah,
don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. Nothing's guaranteed. But yes, it's something that we suffer more in our minds than in reality, and it's almost like, okay, do your need. I what I need to do is to teach my body to say, hey, get rid of this default setting. Let's just focus on like now, right? I'm not talking about even half an hour from now, like an hour from now, but in my mind, outside having a conversation with you where I'm fully paying attention, every now and then, if I'm having like a normal conversation with some friends, my mind would just be wandering and it just start looking for things that I need to do in the future,
Yeah.
which creates all these problems that we don't think about it, or at least we don't internalize like, okay, this is something that I need to change, because we think, okay, I need to do the laundry, I need to go to grocery store, I need to do this. But even those as simple as that can that doesn't create any damage, I guess, to your mood. That behavior being the default, when amplified, it creates all these scenarios in the future that you feel overwhelmed, that you don't know how you're going to make it, and yada yada yada, all these other things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's something that I've been with your advice of looking for something specific and new around me. I think that I would definitely apply those, because I feel that though that is an easier way than trying to stay in the present. Because if I try to force myself to stay in the present, then
Question is,
that
how do
could,
you do that?
yes.
Yeah. So if you're noticing things, you're in the present. So when I look at this little remote here and I say, oh, that says DREO, I hadn't noticed that before. I'm here now. I can't be in the past if I'm, sitting and noticing there's a sticker on here and I don't know if that peels off. No, it doesn't. That's permanent on there. And this appears to be a sensor. I mean, this is a very simple thing. But if I'm noticing this, I can't be somewhere else. It's simply a matter of noticing. And that's what's so great about Ellen Langer, is that she simplified all this. When you say mindfulness, people glaze over because it's been said so many times. And if you say, well, just be present, everyone asks, well, how do you do that? Yeah, you just notice things. You can notice things about a person that you live with. You can notice a new thing every day if you want to, but you have to look.
And we tend to get very lazy at looking at things.
It's called being human.
Yeah.
It's that automatic process. I'm just gonna do. You go ahead and do all these other things, and we'll just automate your day, and you can drink coffee and write, and then go off and think about things. But instead of creating or the things that's supposed to be freeing us up to do, we're future casting.
And it makes total sense, because at the end of the day, you cannot multi-focus. You might be able to multitask, but you cannot multi-focus. So if you put your attention on one thing, your your brain cannot linger and go elsewhere.
Yeah, even multitasking, it really means I'm switching back and forth very quickly. I can't look at both of these at the same time. I can't read two things at the same time. I can flick back and forth really quick. I can call that multitasking, but it's just switching back and forth really quick.
Well, given your example just a few minutes ago, people would come with the argument, well, you can drive and talk to somebody. Yeah, but you're not focusing on the driving, you're focusing on the conversation, and the
Yeah, the
driving
driving is
just,
being done for you automatically.
yeah, totally. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an automatic process in your brain. So I can sit here and I can talk to you and I can do this, and I don't have to focus on this, but my body's used to doing that. It does it automatically.
Yeah, but then if you try to focus on that, then you won't focus on the conversation. So, and that's the whole point of trying to notice things. No, Greg, it's been really definitely like a very insightful thing. I'm trying. As I told you, I'm getting. No, I'm not getting tired. I'm already exhausted of going through all these emotion and things. Not going through them, but knowing that something needs to change, and I'm aware of them. But maybe, and I've tried hypnosis, I've tried therapy, I've tried breath work. I think my next step would be probably like a psychedelic experience. So definitely something that talking to you have given me more peace of mind. And when it comes to, well, if probably in the future, or in the foreseeable future, just do that and see how it goes. Do you know, I guess for everyone is different, how many trips does it take for somebody to heal some traumas or just start living like a better life?
It mostly has to do with what you do after the trip. Okay, so that's a question that I often get, and that's not a number that can be known because it has to do with what you do afterwards. So if you look at all these studies, they're still called MDMA assisted therapy, psilocybin assisted therapy. So the substance is there to bring things up for you to see that those things are there to work through afterwards. It's one of the main things it does. It's possible for people to make some radical change in the aftermath of a psychedelic experience. When it comes to something that's locked in your body for so long, it takes some work afterwards to take care of those automatic programs that are still running in your brain that run your body.
Mm. So I guess maybe if you're somebody who has been holding, you know, emotions for so long, and then you need to create a space for new things, then that would help you just go through them quicker. I would assume that if you do it on your own, and then you are more likely to do uh, like uh, like big changes now that you don't have to deal with that either pain or those things that trigger your body and your emotions on and on and on and on.
Well, they rarely like get rid of the emotions. They can get rid of some of the overflow, so it's not so bad. But when you come back to your environment, there are things happening in your environment that your body responds to that will start that process all over again. So it's not like I have a psychedelic experience and I cry so much that I don't have grief in me anymore. It may help me deal with that. But if there are things that I am doing, repeating behavior over and over again, or for things that I don't like, I've decided that trigger me, or that trigger me because of something that happened, those things may just pop up again. And those are the things for you to work through afterwards.
Got it. Okay, makes sense because I would assume that if you don't do anything about it, the same behaviors and the same patterns will just come,
Almost
again
like
and again and
no.
again.
Yeah. I knew exactly what was happening. I processed all kinds of emotions. I knew exactly why I was the way I was, but it didn't change anything for me until I changed things. Sometimes patterns will only be broken when we break the pattern.
Yep. Yeah. No.
The thing that people do is they look at books and workshops and seminars and therapy and coaching and things like that, going and trying to get some information that's going to make it so that they don't feel what they're feeling, or they're not afraid to do the thing they want to do, or not afraid to stop doing the thing that they're doing. And information rarely does that.
Yeah, people get caught up in the mental masturbation that always they need more information, that they can always listen to one more podcast, read one more book, go to one more seminar. But at the end of the day, that is just fear holding you back. Fear is like, no, dude, you just have to take that step. If not, there's almost so much information that you can use to help with experience. But at the end of the day, if you're not the one taking the action, then you're basically doing absolutely nothing.
Well, remember, all this repetition and all these patterns and all these triggers come from the unconscious mind. Taking information is the conscious mind.
Yeah. That's definitely there are a few changes I need to quite a few changes I need to apply to my life for sure, and especially with this. But yeah, Greg, I've been enjoying this a lot, and I'm getting so much information from you. But as a closing question, if you could go back in time, let's say anywhere, and change one specific moment in your life, what would that be?
This may sound glib, but I've come to the realization that were it not for things that happen in my life, I wouldn't be who I am right now. So, as much as it might seem nice to go back and change something, I don't know where I would end up if that happened. So, um, if certain things had not happened in my life and I hadn't gone on the quest that I've gone on, I might not be talking to you right now, and I'm enjoying talking to you. I might be somewhere. I might be bowling right now or something, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I might not be where I am right now. So some things have been very tough in my life that it seems like I might be able to do without. But I don't know if I would have been led to the same place if any of those changed.
Yeah, I guess because you feel, which when I was thinking about the question, I thought about the same thing, that those were lessons that you were supposed to learn
Absolutely.
one way or the other one.
Yeah.
So whoever you're now is based on the lessons you learn and the experience that force you to be to where you are right now.
Absolutely, yeah. Well said.
Yeah, that's interesting because when I come up with these kind of questions towards the end, I try to answer that for myself, and I said, well, I don't know if I would change something, because if I change something, that means that I wouldn't get the wisdom out of it, so I might as well just keep it. Um,
I like that.
yeah, Greg, been a total pleasure talking to you. If somebody wants to work with you, or just follow you for any of the, either the integration or coaching, where can they find you?
My website is psychedelicintegrationspecialist.com.
Come.
And I'm Greg Lawrence on Facebook and Psychedelic Integration on Instagram. Anybody can reach me at greg at psychedelicintegrationspecialist.com.
Perfect, perfect. Yeah, Greg, and yeah, once again, I hope that that a lot of people can listen to this and understand that it's not as scary as I thought. I'm still, not 100% sure, but I feel a little bit more confidence after talking to you for sure.
Everybody's nervous going to this experience, no matter how many times they've done it before. So it's perfectly normal.
Wait, is that real? It's like even if you have gone like 5, 6 times, you're
Oh,
still feeling
yep, you'll still feel nervous. Your conscious
okay.
mind doesn't like the fact that it's going to be altered and kind of knocked out and won't be in so much control. So
Okay, that is good to know. That is good to know. But yeah, once again, Greg, it's a total pleasure talking to you, and thanks for being on the podcast.
thank you, Daniel. It's nice talking to you.